بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The first hadith which we are going to look at is a hadith which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, narrated by Sayyiduna Ali radhiyallahu anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has said, Naha an mut'atin nisa yawma Khaybara wa an akli luhum al-humur al-insiyya, which means that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has prohibited from nikah muta, from the muta marriage, during the battle of Khaybar, and he has also prohibited from consuming and from eating donkeys during this battle as well. Now this hadith which I mentioned, there are two rulings. The first ruling tells us about nikah muta, and the second ruling tells us about the impermissibility of consuming donkeys. And this is a topic which I'm going to inshallah look at later on. There is a section where he talks about those animals which you are allowed to consume and those animals which you are not allowed to consume. Very briefly, remember it is unlawful and haram to consume donkey. So donkey, mule, you're not allowed to eat that. However, wild donkeys, which we call them zebras, so you're allowed to consume eating zebras. Zebras is permissible and lawful to consume. However, domestic donkeys are your normal donkeys, your mule, or you call them asses and so on, so you're not allowed to consume or eat them. As I said, this is a topic which we'll look at later. Now, the first part of the hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has prohibited from nikah muta. What does nikah muta mean? Now, nikah muta is basically where a man approaches a woman and he says to her that atamatta'u bika kaza muddatan bikaza min al-ma, which means that I want to take benefit from you for this much amount of time, for this much amount of money. So basically he's just approaching a girl and he's saying to her that I want to have intercourse with you, I want to be with you for 1 week, for 2 weeks, and this is the dowry or this is the money which I'm going to give you. Now when you look at it, in other words, this form of muta or this form of nikah, to put it plainly, is like another form of prostitution. This is what it says here, that you're just going to a woman and you say, okay, can I have intercourse with you, can I do this with you for 1 week, for 2 weeks, and I'll give you this much amount of money. There's no mention of the word nikah, and also there's no such thing as witnesses being present, or the mention of a kind of dowry, or the mention of rights of the wives and the husband, nothing like that. It's just basically a marriage which is just full of lust, where a man is fulfilling his desires with a woman. No concept of nikah, no concept of marriage at all. Now this form of nikah, this form of taking benefit from a woman, according to all the four schools of thought, according to all the imams, according to the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, is something which is unlawful and haram. Such a nikah, such a contract is not permissible with a woman. However, on the other hand, the Shias are of the view that such a nikah and such a form of contract is permissible and allowed. That you can actually go to a particular woman and say that I want to spend the night with you, this is the money which I'm going to give. According to them, such a nikah, such a contract is permissible and lawful. However, according to the four schools of thought, according to the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, such a contract is considered unlawful, such a contract is considered haram and impermissible. Now, what are our evidence to show that it is unlawful and haram. The main evidence which we use is a verse which can be found in Surah Al-Mu'minun, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when describing the qualities of the believers, He says, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ, that the believers are those who protect their private parts, إِلَّا عَلَىٰ أَزْوَاجِهِمْ, except with their wives, أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ, and except with their slave girls. Now from this particular verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that the only way you can fulfill your desires and your shahwa and so on and so forth is either with your wife or number two, with your slave girl. Other form of fulfilling your desires is something which is unlawful and haram in Islam. And because this form of contract or nikah and muta, you're not actually fulfilling your desires with a woman, with your wife. It's just like any strange woman for a night, you're just fulfilling your desires with her. So therefore, this is something which goes against this particular Quranic verse, because the Quran and the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that you can only fulfill your desires with A, your wife, and B, with your slave girl. Any other form of fulfilling desires, whether it's like a nikah or a kind of contract for a night, or one night stand, or affairs and other kind of things, this is something which is unlawful and haram and impermissible in Islam. So that is the first evidence which we use. The second evidence which we use is the hadith which I mentioned in front of you, the hadith from Bukhari and Muslim, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam quite clearly had prohibited from an mut'at al-nisa, from nikah al-muta, from this form of fulfilling desires, this kind of one night stand you're having with a woman and then you're paying her for it. Then the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has prohibited us from doing this, and this is quite clearly mentioned in this particular hadith. Now you may be thinking that, okay, if the ahadith is so clear, then why do we have on the other hand the Shias who say that no, this form of nikah and this form of fulfilling your desires is still allowed? Because the hadith quite clearly says that it's haram to do it, but why do they say that, or you can still do it? Now the reason why they say that you can still do it is because they say that the ahadith with regards to the impermissibility of muta, there are many contradictions or many conflicts regarding that particular hadith. In terms of when did this form of nikah become unlawful and haram? Now basically the Shias, they say that look, we've got the hadith here, but the ahadith is contradictory in terms of there are many ahadith which talks about when did this particular form of nikah and muta become unlawful and haram. What I'm trying to say is that look, this hadith in Bukhari and Muslim is telling us that nikah and muta became impermissible during the Battle of Khaybar. However, there is another hadith where it mentions that the impermissibility of nikah and muta was mentioned during the conquest of Makkah. Then there is another hadith which says that the impermissibility of muta happened during the Battle of Hunayn. And then it goes on to say, in the hadith afterwards, it then goes on to say that the impermissibility was made during the Battle of Awtas. So because there was various battles, very basically, is that the impermissibility of muta happened during the Battle of Khaybar. Yawma Khaybar. It happened during the Battle of Khaybar. And afterwards, the next battle which then happened was the conquest of Makkah, which happened in 8th Hijri. And during this battle, for a few days, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam allowed the permissibility of muta. And then 3 days later, he then prohibited it. So those companions who were present at that time, they then narrated that yes, during the conquest of Makkah, muta became unlawful. But those companions who weren't present at that particular time, later on, the next battle which happened was Hunayn. They then heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibiting muta again, so they thought that, oh, the prohibition happened during the battle of Hunayn. Then there were some companions who weren't present during the conquest of Makkah and during the battle of Hunayn, but they were present during the battle of Awtas, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam reminded everyone of the prohibition. So therefore the companions who heard it during the battle of Awtas thought that the prohibition of muta happened in the battle of Awtas. So this is why you get differences of opinion. But the actual prohibition took place during the battle of Khaybar, which happened in the 7th year of Hijri, and then the next year when the conquest of Makkah happened, for 3 days Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam allowed the nikah muta, and afterwards it then became prohibited and unlawful, and the prohibition and the unlawfulness will remain all the way until the day of judgment and the day of Qiyamah. Now you may be thinking that why did the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam allow muta for 3 days? Why did he allow it? Now the reason why he allowed it during the conquest of Makkah is because many of the companions, they were away from home. Remember, they were living in Medina Munawwara, they were away from home, so obviously they were missing their wives, they were obviously missing their desires and so on. So therefore for 3 days Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam allowed them to have a temporary marriage with some slave girls or with some slave women from Makkah, and then afterwards when the 3 days passed, then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then prohibited the muta, and this prohibition will remain all the way until the day of judgment and the day of Qiyamah. So the conclusion of this particular masla and ruling with regards to muta is that this is something which is unlawful and haram, and the unlawfulness, the hurma, the impermissibility will remain all the way until the day of judgment and the day of Qiyamah. Now the next hadith which I'm going to mention is a hadith which can be found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, Sunan Abu Dawud, Sunan al-Nasai, Sunan Ibn Majah, narrated by Abdullah bin Mas'ud anhu, who says, قال علمنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم التشهد في الصلاة والتشهد في الحاجة, which means that the Prophet of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم taught us what to recite in the tashahhud in namaz. And tashahhud here means at-tahiyyat lillah wa salawat wa tayyibat, what we recite in the first sitting and in the second sitting of a 4 rakat prayer, of a 3 rakat prayer, and obviously in the final sitting in a 2 rakat prayer. وَالتَّشَهُّدَ فِي الْحَاجَةِ, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam also taught us the khutbah and the tashahhud which we should recite at the beginning of the nikah, at the beginning of the marriage. Now what this particular hadith is telling us is that the same way you recite a khutbah or you recite a tashahhud, tashahhud basically means where you praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we do that in the salah, we do that in the sitting position. Similarly, it is also considered to be a sunnah and something desirable that before you conduct the nikah, that the Imam Sahib, before he says to the girl that, okay, do you want to get married to this particular boy, or the girl's father, before he like for example, when he asks the girl's father, do you want your daughter to get married to this particular boy, and then he asks the boy that you want to get married to this particular girl, before he makes the offer and acceptance, ijab and qabul, it is considered a sunnah that he should recite the tashahhud beforehand. He should recite a khutbah beforehand. And the khutbah which is mentioned in the hadith here is to recite Alhamdulillahi wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina man yahdillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. To recite that. And thereafterwards to recite certain verses from the Holy Quran which talks about the importance or the virtues of nikah. So after you've done that khutbah, then the imam should there afterwards recite one or two verses regarding the virtues of nikah, the importance of nikah. And the verse which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would recite will be, Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu taqullah haqqa tuqatihi, which means that all those who believe, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala haqqa tuqatihi, as you're supposed to have fear Him, وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ, and you will not pass away or death will not overtake you unless you are in the state of Islam. Now this verse Rasulullah would always recite when he would do a nikah of a companion or a female sahabi. Now you may be thinking that, well, this verse talks about taqwa and piety, nothing to do with nikah and marriage. Why did Rasulullah recite this verse? Now the reason why Rasulullah recited this verse is because taqwa and piety is something which is very, very important when it comes to nikah. And that's why whenever a man decides to get married, the hadith says that always look to marry a pious and a righteous woman. And similarly, when a woman or a girl decides to get married, the order from the Sharia is that she should marry a pious and a religious man. Now, why is religiousness and piety so important? It's so important because if you have a husband who is very, very pious, who is righteous, then what happens is that he will fulfill every single right and every single haqq of his wife. And similarly, if you have a wife who is pious and who is righteous, she will try her best to fulfill every single haqq and right of her husband. So there's many, many rights, and to tell the truth, it's only if someone who happens to be knowledgeable or someone who happens to be pious and he has the fear of Allah, only such people will fulfill the rights of their wives, and similarly such wives will fulfill the rights of the husband. Because when you look at it, there are many, many rights, and it tells you even like someone who is practicing, he finds it difficult to fulfill all the rights of his wife. But if someone is really, really practicing, and on top of that he has the taqwa and the fear of Allah. What I mean by fear of Allah, he's always fearing Allah in terms of that, look, if I don't fulfill the rights of my wife, then on the day of judgment, I'm going to be punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he had that fear, then what happens automatically, it then brings the zeal in his heart in terms of, you know what, I need to fulfill my wife's rights, otherwise I'm going to be in trouble in the hereafter. So this is why Allah, Rasulullah would always recite the verse about taqwa, ittaqullah haqqa tuqatihi, that fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as you meant to, وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. And remember, I mentioned this hadith before as well, that if we don't fulfill the rights of anyone, whether it's of our wives, whether it's of our children, whether it's of the next door neighbor, whether it's of our Muslim brother, then what happens on the day of judgment will be coming to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with so much reward and so much sawab. But then what will happen? A person will go to Allah and will say, oh Allah, such a person, he did not fulfill my rights. A wife may go to Allah and say, oh Allah, my husband did not fulfill my rights. Then what will happen on the day of judgment? Because remember, there's no dinar and dirham, there's no money in the hereafter. You can't then say to your wife, okay, this is the money for the rights which I did not fulfill. What will happen is your good deeds and your good a'mal will now go to that particular person. To such an extent that when you now have no deeds and no a'mal remaining, then that person's bad deeds and evil deeds will now come unto you. And then what will then happen is that because you've now got so much evil deeds and evil actions over you, you will now be thrown into the fire of hell. And that's why in the hadith, Rasulullah when he was describing that person, he said to the companions, do you know who a bankrupt person is? So the companion said, yeah, a bankrupt person is someone who had a lot of money, but then afterwards he lost all his money. Then Rasulullah replied to saying, no, a bankrupt person is not that person. A bankrupt person is someone who A banker person is someone who, like for example, who comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with so much a'mal and so much need, but then he goes, but he's sent to the fire of hell. Why? Because he did not fulfill the rights and the huquq of people. So that is the first verse which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would recite. Then the second verse Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would recite in the khutbah would be Ya ayyuhallazina amanu taqullaha allazi tasaaluna bihi wal arham inna Allaha kana alaykum raqiba, which talks about the importance of maintaining ties, maintaining kinship. And then the third verse which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would recite in the khutbah will be Ya ayyuhallazina amanu taqullaha وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. So basically what we can gather from this particular hadith is that it is a sunnah and it is desirable that you recite the khutbah before you conduct the nikah, before you conduct the marriage. Imam Shafi rahmatullah is of the view that for every transaction you do, it is a sunnah to recite the khutbah. Imam Shafi goes on to say that, if you are selling something in the shops and in the dukan, even then you should recite khutbah before. This is what Imam Shafi rahmatullah says. Obviously it's not going to be practical in this day and age, but at the very least when it comes to something like nikah or any other kind of transactions or uqud or any other kind of agreement, then it's considered desirable and it's considered sunnah that you say the khutbah, or the very least you write the khutbah before you do or conduct that particular agreement or transaction. Because the next two ahadith talks about the importance of saying the khutbah. The next hadith which can be found in Tirmidhi, narrated by Sayyidina Abu Hurairah anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, kullu khutbatin, that every khutbah laysa fiha tashahhud, where there is no mention of tashahhud, where there is no mention of Allah's praise or glory, fahiya kal yadil jazma, that such a nikah and such a marriage will entail no benefit. Yadil jazma basically means a hand which has been cut off. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying that, just say if a nikah has been done, but the boy and the girl, or the imam who was conducting the nikah, he didn't even say any khutbah. He didn't say, any tarif of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He didn't glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He just went straight to the girl and asked, okay, do you want to marry this boy? The boy then said, yes, I want to marry this girl, and that's it. This is the nikah in that particular way. So the hadith goes on to say that such a nikah, kal yadil jazma, would be like a hand or an arm which has been cut off. To say your arm has been cut off, is there any benefit in the arm? No, you can't do anything with this arm anymore. So exactly the same, if a nikah has been conducted and there was no khutbah in that particular nikah, there was no praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or His Nabi or His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was no glorification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he mentions that such a nikah will have no benefit and will be no virtue and no fadail in that particular nikah, and that particular nikah will be empty of any kind of guidance and any kind of benefit. The next hadith thereafter, again very similar to what I just mentioned, is the hadith of Sunan Ibn Majah, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Kullu amrin zi balin la yubda fihi bilhamdillah fahuwa aqta," which means kullu amrin means that everything which you do, la yubda fihi bilhamdillah, and you do not begin with the praise of Allah, fahuwa aqta, then that thing which you have done will have no barakah and no blessings in that. So the hadith is saying, kullu amrin ziba, anything important which you are doing. If you do not begin with Alhamdulillah, if you do not begin with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's praise or glory, then what will happen is that that thing which you have started, there will be no barakah and there will be no blessings in that. So that's why even like for example when I started the talk today, I always begin with Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin wa salatu. You just mention some kind of khutbah or some kind of praise of Allah, or Nahmaduhu wa nasalli ala Rasulil Kareem. These kind of words, sometimes when Jamaat people come, they give a speech and then they start with Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala, or when the Imam is about to start his khutbah or his sermon or his speech before, he always begins with something like praising with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason why we do that, reason why Imams and Shuyukh do this, is because if they didn't, then whatever message they're going to deliver, it will be free of any kind of barakah and blessing, meaning that there will be no barakah and blessing in what they are doing. So therefore it's important and it's necessary that if you want that speech to actually have an effect on the hearts of the people, it's very important that you at least start the khutbah or whatever you're doing, the sermon or whatever you're doing, with the blessings and with the name and the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Inshallah, we'll just leave it there for this week. Let's go fix up on instead of